We left the Hope Motel. We stopped and picked up some stuff, chicken little nuggets and some salad at McDonald's, and got on the I-95 and went up to the first rest stop and stopped there. It was still a very, very hot day, and had our lunch and went in there and got some paper and got a map of Delaware. It was in Wilmington, Delaware, in the Plaza for Information Center for Delaware, and continued to drive on up I-95, then took 202 over to US 1 as directed, and went up US 1 with a few missed cues, and continued to Haverford Road, turned up Haverford Road and got to College Avenue, and then turned around and went back to a little shopping place called City Line, and bought some wrapping paper and wrapped a box of cookies for the Farage. We came back and spent supper with Lillian and her daughter, youngest daughter, and one son, Chris. We went to bed early, and the following day, Saturday morning, we got up and had breakfast, and then went downtown and looked around the Independence Square area, parked in a parking garage for $4 a day for the weekend days, and took some pictures and took a horse carriage ride around the square. Did a little shopping in one of the department stores. Big department store there, had 7 floors of items, and I don't remember the name of that. Soon then from there we came back and got cleaned up and dressed and went out to Overbrook Country Club, where Don has a membership, and had supper. I had tuna, Nicole had grouper, and the rest had grouper, I believe, and it was very tasty. I had an order of known as mussels, very, very salty, but had some basil in it. The rest had grouper, all of it was broiled, and Lillian had a low-fat diet, does require a low-fat diet. Don had his specialty, which was oysters and a chicken salad and several other items. The rest basically were grouper, and so after that we came back and went to bed early and got up the next morning, had breakfast with corned beef hash. Donna was up early preparing for a big course of supper, 5 o'clock this afternoon, Sunday. And the weather has turned cooler. It's much nicer. It's now about 10:30 in the morning, and Nicole's writing a letter to her grandparents. I guess we plan to go back down to the square and look around down there. We will be with Don's youngest daughter and
regarding Independence Hall before we do get started. First off, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Frank. I'm going to be your guide. We're going to take about 25 to 30 minutes to see Independence Hall. We're going to see the entire building, both the first and the second floor of this building. Now, I'd like you to keep in mind that this is a very old building we're going into. It was constructed back in the 1730s. And between 85 and 90% of the materials that went into making up this building are still over there. So when you go inside, take a look at the woodwork. That's been there for 2.5 centuries. Listen to the brickwork that surrounds this building. It's been there just as long. So when we do go inside, we ask that you refrain from any eating or drinking or smoking, bubble gum. We want to be able to keep the building in good shape. We want to be able to preserve it so that folks 200 years down the road get a chance to see this building as well. Obviously, we're not going to have any problems, but you can understand why I have to say that. Now, another thing I would like to throw out for your consideration is, since we are going up to the second floor of Independence Hall, we're going to go up a very long and old colonial staircase. Now, the stairs are very fine, but they're a little bit different. than what we have today. Because all the steps are shorter. There's a lot more of them. Now, I find it's very easy for folks to trip on these stairs. In fact, a number of folks have, and I'm just as guilty as anyone. So I want you to be aware of the difference in the steps. Be careful going up and down the staircase. We won't have any problems. Folks coming in the door, you're welcome to come on in and have a seat. Join us here. Just get ready to go over and see. Now, there is one other thing I'd like to warn you about with Independence Hall. There's a rather interesting phenomenon that occurs over there. Some of the rooms we're going to see have banisters or railings. Sometimes folks like to lean on these railings to rest on them. Well, that's all right. That's okay. But sometimes folks like to put their knees through them so they can lean a little better. That's not all right. See, knees go through the banisters very easily. The trick is getting them back. They get stuck. Now, if somebody gets stuck over there, that means we're going to have to get them unstuck. That's going to take time. That means we're not going to see nearly as much as we could. And it's also going to lead to some embarrassment for someone. Obviously, nobody wants this to happen to them, so I'd advise you that you really don't want to put your knees through the banister. All right? Now, folks with cameras, you're welcome to take pictures over at Independence Hall. You can take as many as you like. Flash photography is fine, and considering the weather, it's probably encouraged. And we'll give you every opportunity to take the pictures. Once we do get started, you want to bring all your belongings with you, all your packages, because we won't be coming back here. We'll be finishing up over there. Okay? Does anybody have any questions before we go ahead and get started? Well, why don't we go ahead and take a look at Independence Hall? Ourselves, but for the sake of those who might have gotten caught in this, we might want to take a look around. Some of the taller folks might want to take a quick look behind them to see if there's somebody a little less tall behind them. You might want to trade places so everybody gets a chance to see what's happening. I think we're pretty well situated. Well, I'd like to welcome you all here to Independence Hall. This is a building that was constructed back in 1732. Now, when they built it, it obviously wasn't called Independence Hall just yet. It had a different name. It was called the Pennsylvania State House. That's its official name. Independence Hall is really nothing more than a nickname given to the State House back in 1824. A gentleman came all the way from France to see this building, and he made a speech out in front in which he referred to it as the Halls of Independence. From that they derived the name Independence Hall. Now, the gentleman who made this speech drew a lot of attention to himself. His name was the Marquis de Lafayette, a hero of the Revolution, somebody that people were bound to pay attention to. He's the gentleman who named this building Independence Hall. Now, the purpose of this building was to house the entire colonial government of Pennsylvania in one place. This is where they made all the laws for Pennsylvania. This is where they practiced or tested all those laws. Now, we're going to start right here and eventually work our way through the building. I'd like to start right here because this is the highest court in all of Pennsylvania. And this is where Pennsylvanians were introduced to their government. This is where they were introduced to their legal system. Where you're standing right now is specifically set aside for folks such as yourselves, spectators. It was a spectators gallery. People would stand where you are and watch trials unfold before them and learn about the legal system by observation. Now, this could be a very important learning tool. One of the most influential lawyers in all of colonial America was a gentleman named Patrick Henry, Virginia. The gentleman who gave you the speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." He was a lawyer. He learned his trade as a lawyer from your side of the banister. Merely by watching trials and observing the lawyers, he became one, without that added expense of law school either. Okay? Now, a lot of what you see in this room appears very familiar to Americans. This is not an American courtroom. This is an English courtroom. A lot of what appears familiar has been adopted into the American legal system from the British system. The idea of a trial by jury is not something new to Americans. This is something the English had, and something that was guaranteed to them by the Magna Carta. So you'll notice the jury boxes that appear on either side of the room here. This is called the grand jury. 24 people would sit here, and they would decide if there's enough evidence to even take a person to trial, to indict them. If they decide there is, they're going to dismiss this jury and convene a smaller one up front. That's called the petit jury. 12 people will sit there, and it would be ultimately their decision that will decide if a person was innocent or guilty. Now, other things appear very familiar in this courtroom. The judge's bench runs across the front here. There can be anywhere from 1 to 5 judges presiding in this room, depending on the nature of the crime. The more serious the crime, well, the more judges present. You could be brought before this court for anything, from high treason, murder, down to chicken stealing, or excessive gossiping. Things are a little tougher. Now, there are some things that appear rather odd or peculiar to Americans in this courtroom. Probably one of the strangest things in this room is this apparatus I'm standing in. This is something called the prisoner's dock. This is where a defendant would stand during a trial. The term stand trial was quite literal 200 years ago. It stood inside the iron bars. Now, the bars aren't really meant to keep anyone locked up or in prison. They were merely to set a person apart, put them on a stage, so everybody who came into this room knew exactly who was on trial. Now, I would like to point out the coat of arms up here on the wall. It's a rather interesting point, definitely a sore point in this room, a point of contention. It's the authority of the courtroom. It tells you by whose authority these judges will sit. Now, back in the colonial times, when it was an English courtroom, there was a much different coat of arms up on this wall. They were the coat of arms of the King of England, George III, but they're no longer here. Because in July of 1776, a group of men met just outside the back door here. They read a rather stirring document, the Declaration of Independence. They read it to over 1,000 listeners that day. Now, 8 of these listeners were so moved by this that they immediately burst into this courtroom and tore down the King's coat of arms. They paraded them through the streets of Philadelphia that afternoon. And later on that evening, threw them into a bonfire. So the most celebrated moment in the history of this courtroom was an act of treason committed up front here. If these men were ever brought into this courtroom and put on trial and found guilty, they could have been put to death. But none of these men were ever put on trial. None of them ever stood inside the prisoner's dock. And the reason is looking you right in the eye now. This is the crest for the new authority of the court. This is the seal for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And in the eyes of the court here, this was no act of treason. This was an act of patriotism. So rather than condemning these 8 individuals, these impetuous men who took their lives into their hands, they congratulated them. Incidentally, the coat of arms you're looking at is original to Independence Hall. That dates back to 1785. And what I'd like to do now is show you the most important room in all of Independence Hall. And it's just behind you. So if you'd like to do an about face, we'll go over and see the assembly. Probably the most famous room in all of America. One of the most infamous room in America. Now, this room originally was designed to house the colonial government of Pennsylvania. They were called Pennsylvania Assembly. Later on, the state government used the very same room. But between these two governments, this was the home of an outlaw revolutionary government called the Second Continental Congress. Men who gathered here in May of 1775 came from 13. Before they arrived in the city, gunfire had already broken out in the colony of Massachusetts. The battles of Lexington and Concord had already been fought. So the men who came to Philadelphia spent most of 1775, even part of the next year, trying to bring themselves back into the English Empire. They sent off an olive branch petition to the king. They tried to reconcile themselves with the crown. But the King of England wouldn't pay any attention to these men. He ignored them. Finally, pushed to desperation, one gentleman did stand up here and offered a rather unique solution, a truly astounding one. His name was Richard Henry Lee. He stood up from this table right over here, the Virginia table. Richard Henry Lee addressed the Congress with the very simple words: resolve that these united colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states. Now, this is independence have been used in this country. Now, there were a number of active supporters who quickly rallied to Mr. Lee. Probably his most notable supporter came from clear across the room, John Adams of the Massachusetts state. Now, there were some here who weren't willing to go quite so far as Mr. Lee or Mr. Adams would have them. What these gentlemen were offering was treason. Now, they argued back. One of the longest rooms in all the colonies. And the only purpose it had was purely social. This is a place where dignitaries were brought and entertained. They'd stayed dinners here, music, dancing. It was a very elegant place. And it's probably the most fondly remembered room of the colonies. That's why it's ironic that the most cherished room of the colony was the most despised room of the Revolution. At the height of the American Revolution in 1777, the British Army did indeed capture Philadelphia, as we were talking about downstairs. When they captured the city, they captured a number of Washington's troops and his wounded. Those that were captured were imprisoned here at the State House, on the second floor. Now, the British had a very difficult winter here in Philadelphia. They didn't have very much in the way of supplies for their own troops, much less these captive rebels. So these men were left to their own devices. Without attention, a number of these men passed away right here. So downstairs, you saw the rooms where people were willing to risk their necks on behalf of an ideal or a dream. Upstairs here, gentlemen actually gave their lives to try and make that a reality. Now, what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to take a look around up here, do a little bit of exploring before you head on down the stairs. There are two very important rooms that sit off of either end of this long gallery. The one room that appears down here is the governor's council chamber. That's where the governor of Pennsylvania can be found, his advisors. And the room that appears on the other end, we're going to open up in just a second, was a committee room for the assembly downstairs. One of the most important committees that worked here came during the Revolution. They're called the Board of War. Everything that went to feed and equip George Washington's army had to go through these two tiny doors. If you look for that agency today, what you would find is the Pentagon. The large building has 10,000 people working for it now. 200 years ago, it was 5 gentlemen who met around the table in this one little room. It's changed quite a bit. So why don't we take about 3 or 4 minutes, take a look at these rooms. Then we're going to have to head on downstairs. Another group's coming on up.
Is there another floor?
At the First Church Cemetery, the last resting place on the Benjamin Franklin. It's on the northwest corner, and there's a big flat marble plate here with Benjamin and Deborah Franklin. Also is buried is Richard and Sarah Bache. I think Sarah was his daughter. The last resting place of Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, venerated for benevolence, admired for talents, esteemed for patriotism, beloved for philosophy. Washington.
What does Washington say?
Written by Washington. Sage whom two worlds claim as their own. Marabout. He tore from the skies lightning, and from tyrants the scepter. To God. To go. Liberty in politics. The Statue of Liberty was a grant from the French people commemorating the alliance of France and the United States during the American Revolution. It is represented more than simple generosity. By honoring the democracy of the United States, the French who proposed the gift were indirectly criticizing the repressive Second Empire, 1853 to 1870 at home. France had aided the American Revolution. Lafayette had fought beside Washington. The monument to be at once reminder of this historic friendship and a bold call for returning democracy to France. Augustus Bartoli, among the most enthusiastic supporters of Laborese proposed monument was Augustus Bartoli, a young sculptor fascinated with the idea of creating colossal works. Designed for the statue celebrating American democracy was only one of the several grandiose projects. Bartoli's earlier unexecuted scheme for an eminence lighthouse to the entry of Suez Canal was an important forerunner for his Statue of Liberty. Holy ambition has been to engrave my name at the feet of great men and in service of great ideas. Auguste Bartoli. 1871, Bartoli came to America to promote his idea for a statue and perhaps more importantly to find an appropriate home for it. He understood that a grand monument required an equally grand setting. In his extensive travels, Bartoli discussed the project with politicians, publishers, and even President Grant. He returned to France having found mixed interest and the perfect site, a small island in New York Harbor. Everything in America is big, even peas. Augusta Bartoli. Liberty was a controversial idea in the 19th century. Too many people, it suggested violence and revolution. Laboulaye and Bartoli agreed that their monument should not be seen as leading to an uprising, but rather as a lightening the way peacefully and lawfully. The key element was the name they gave to the statue. Liberty, enlightening the world. From idea to image. For 2,000 years, the Roman goddess of liberty was commonly used to represent freedom in arts and on coins. She was traditionally shown wearing the Pargarian bonnet that Romans bestowed on free slaves and holding a scepter of sovereignty over herself. Often she was accompanied by a liberty-loving cat. By Bartoli's day, however, the ancient symbols had lost much of their meaning. He thus faced the challenge of creating an electric new image of liberty to convey an old age idea. The Statue of Liberty is a tapestry of old symbols woven together to create a new meaning. Her classical face and drapery suggest a Roman goddess of liberty. The broken shackles symbolize freedom newly achieved. The radiant crown represents her shedding of light on the seven seas and continents. The tablet she holds is inscribed in Roman numerals July 4th, 1776, identifies the figure as an apostle of American freedom, law, and justice. The statue is green. Visitors from the statue often ask why it is green. The answer is in the air. When copper is exposed to air, it undergoes chemical reactions that form layers of corrosion. This natural protection process, called platination, can be seen at work on the statue's skin. The portions of the original curl shown above. It can also be observed on buildings where copper is used for roofing and ornamentation. The statue, measuring 151 feet, 46.02 meters, to the top of the torch, Bartoli's statue expressed even legendary Colossus of Rhodes. The task of sculpturing this mammoth figure was equally immense. The usual materials, stone, marble, and bronze, were far too heavy and costly. Only by using a lightweight skin of hammered copper sheet supported by an iron framework could Bartholdi's dream become a reality. The repousse method. A towering structure requires a lightweight construction, so colossal statues often use wafer-thin sheets of metal hammered into shape. This technique is known as repousse, from the French to push forward, and was used in the 17th century when the statue of San Carlos Borromeo, that stands over 75 feet tall, 23 meters. The Colossus of Rhodes may have been another example of repousse fabrication technique. After Bartholdi completed the design in 1875, his 4-foot, 1.21 meters clay study model was enlarged in 3 stages, each requiring more than 9,000 measurements. The carpenters built a wooden form following the contour for the full-size figure. The forms were removed, and over 3,000 thin sheets of copper, most from Norway, were forcibly hammered inside them. Finally, the statue's copper skin, barely 3/32 of an inch thick, or 2.38 millimeters, was reinforced with iron bars for rigidity. This copper skin weighs more than 62,000 pounds, or 28.12 metric tons. The difficult task of supporting this heavy load was further complicated by the statue's unusual shape. It is off-balanced by the arm and the high winds of New York Harbor. To overcome these obstacles, Bartholdi returned to the brilliant engineer Gustav Eiffel, who devised an ingenious new support system. The Statue of Liberty was shipped to America. It was first assembled in Paris. The French fell in love with Liberty as she was gradually grew in construction. In the construction yard near Parc Monceau, the Lady of the Park was viewed and visited, praised, and painted. Finally, on 4th July 1884, hundreds gathered at the feet of the giant goddess to watch as the statue was formally presented to Levi P. Morton, the U.S. Minister to France. The Statue of Liberty's creator felt strongly that the project should be a joint effort. The French people would donate the statue, the Americans the pedestal. The Franco-American Union was established in 1875 to oversee the French contribution. It took fully 5 years of imaginative efforts and special events to raise the 600,000 francs and gain the popular support and enthusiasm that they needed. The people, over 100,000 individual French citizens in 180 towns, contributed to the Statue of Liberty. Fundraising events included the sale of signed terracotta models of the statue and Liberty Canta by Cornude, performed at the Paris Opera. Half of the total sum was raised by the French. It came from the lottery offering of table settings, jewelry, furniture. Liberty was also licensed as a commercial logo. Her likeness appeared on products, labels, posters, and publications. The statue's pedestal was designed by American architect Richard Morris Hunt, 1827 to 1895, on commission from the American Committee for the Statue of Liberty. 2 years of work and numerous rejected proposals, both Hunt and Bartholdi, preceded Hunt's final version in 1884. The 87-foot, 26.51 meter granite pedestal is an architectural monument in its own right, yet exists in harmony with the other colossus above it. The price tag for building the pedestal and erecting the statue topped $300,000. The American Committee raised half of this sum between 1877 and 1884. Then a crisis occurred. The statue was due to arrive and funds ran out, and work on the pedestal stopped. In March 1885, publisher Joseph Pulitzer and his newspaper, The World, came to the rescue with a highly successful 6-month fundraising campaign. The assembled statue sailed into New York Harbor aboard the Azari on June 19, 1985. She was met with tremendous fanfare and naval parade. Then her pieces were stored in sheds for nearly a year until the pedestal was completed. At last, in 1886, the construction crews were ready to begin the most difficult, dangerous work of all, reassembling the statue without scaffolding on Bedloe's Island. Wet and foggy weather did not stop the 1 million New Yorkers from turning out to cheer the Statue of Liberty on October 28, 1886. The official dedication took place beneath the Colossus, glistening with rain. Bartholdi's release of the tricolor flag that veiled the Liberty's face, setting off Aurora guns, whistles and applause. President Grover Cleveland and saluted Bartholdi as the greatest man in America today. The dream of my life is accomplished. I see the symbol of unity and friendship between the two nations, two great republics, Augusta, Bartholdi, October 26, 1886. During its first 100 years, the Statue of Liberty saw many numerous renovations. The most extensive was the restoration of 1980s. This undertaking was carried out by the National Park Service and the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation Incorporated. The skilled American craftsmen, following the plans developed by teams of architects, engineers, and conservators from both the public and private sector, replaced most of the rusted iron armature and removal of paint from the interior of the copper skin and the iron structure. They also corrected serious structural problems, made several improvements for visitors, and the most dramatic of all, French craftsmen fashioned completely a new flame and upper portion of the torch. The work was paid for by private contributions from children, adults, foundations, organizations, and corporations. On July 4th, 1986, the United States joyfully celebrated the statue's centennial. Thanks to the extraordinary generosity of thousands in America and around the world who contributed to her rejuvenation, the statue entered her second century stronger and sturdier than ever before. It is a comfort to know that this statue will exist thousands of years from now, long after our names will be forgotten. Bartholdi.
Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, himself an ardent Quaker, was a haven for Quakerism. Long accustomed to persecution, even death for their beliefs, the Quakers persisted, slowly increasing in number throughout the colonies. The colony of Jamestown, founded in 1607, was a promotional venture backed by private stockholders in the Virginia Company in England. By 1619, however, things changed for the better. Jamestown had grown to well over 1,000 settlers. Private property had been instituted, along with the English common law and due process. Were one to visit the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the mid-1600s, among settlers tilling the soil, he might come upon a strange sight: the Saugus Iron Works near the settlement of Lynn. Too ambitious for its time, the Saugus Iron Works went out of business before 1676. However, its influence continued, for ironworkers who had worked at Saugus established ironworks in other colonies.
In the mid-1800s, from all over Europe, emigrants by the thousands flocked to ports of embarkation to cross the Atlantic. They came in swarms to Bremen and Hamburg in Germany, Le Havre in France, Göteborg in Sweden, but mostly to England's Liverpool, to embark in tiny sailing packets, later in steamers, little dreaming of the nightmare voyage they would have to endure before reaching the coveted shores of the New World. Many, seasick and miserable, would spend the entire voyage lying in their bunks amid the clutter of luggage, trunks, tables, and cooking stoves. Yet somehow they endured. In time, the faster steamship displaced the sailing packet. Steerage conditions remained harsh, but did improve. For those who survived the physical torture of the Atlantic crossing, and there were many thousands who did not survive, it all seemed worthwhile. For at the end of their ordeal, one day at last, came the blessed sight of a golden shore, the New World.
We took a picture of the Verrazzano statue commemorating this Italian navigator. Clinton National Monument is the last of the series of forts which the Dutch settlement of 1624 guarded the lower Manhattan. This structure was built by the United States in the year 1808 to 1811. It was first called West Battery, and it was one of the important defenses of the New York Harbor during the War of 1812 period. Named in honor of Governor DeWitt Clinton in 1815, in that year it was made headquarters of the U.S. 3rd Military District. From 1860 to 1820, General Winfield Scott was in command. The headquarters was removed from the castle, Clinton, to Governor's Island in 1820. This is at Battery Park in Lower Manhattan, New York. First picture was they called the Immigrants, dedicated to the people of all nations who entered the United States of America through Castle Garden in memory of Samuel Rudin, 1896 to 1975, whose parents arrived in America in 1883. May 5th, about 12 o'clock, we're on top of the Empire State Building, looking south at the Statue of Liberty. Took one picture of George's kind of southeast, and took another one of the Statue of Liberty. Nicole bought 2 pennies that were smashed to give the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building on it. She has now taken some pictures to the west and north. A picture to the north looking at Central Park and showing possibly the public library building just adjacent almost to the Empire State Building on the north side.